A C# program is organized into three different parts: a file, a project, and a solution. This can be a little confusing for beginners, but it's pretty straightforward. A file is just a single file that contains code, just like a Word document with your history essay. A project is a collection of files that are all related to each other, so maybe that's like a folder with all the Word documents for your history class. And a solution is a collection of projects that are all related to each other. That would be the USB drive that has all the folders for all of your classes. Just make sure you don't lose it, because there's no way your history teacher believes that's what happened. We're going to make a solution for each assignment, like the Module 4 programming assignments, for example, and then within that we'll have a project for each program we write. Many of my assignments have Part A and Part B, so those will be our projects within the Module 4 programming assignment solution. The way you create your solution and projects will depend on what IDE you're using. If you're using Visual Studio Community, and make sure you're not confusing that with Visual Studio Code, which is a different program, you have a few different ways to create a new project. And notice that I'm saying create a project, not a solution. The solution is created when we create the project. That's the kind of stuff that can make this a little confusing. If you have this start screen, you can get going by clicking the link that says Create New Project. If you don't have that screen, you can also just go to the File menu and select New and then Project. And you can also use the keyboard shortcut Control-Shift-N. Visual Studio can be used for all kinds of different stuff, so we have a few different things to watch out for when we're creating our project. We're using C#, so make sure you select that from the language list. And the type of program we're creating is called a console application. An easy way to find that template is by typing console in the search box. Make sure you're picking the one that says it'll run on Windows, Mac OS, and Linux, since I sometimes use my Mac to grade your work. If you select the one that says .NET Framework, I won't be able to open it. Now, if you don't have the console app template as an option, you might be missing part of the installation called a workload. In that case, go all the way to the bottom to where it says not finding what you're looking for, and click on that Install More Tools and Features link. That will open up the Visual Studio installer where you can add the .NET desktop environment workload. Once we have the console app template selected, we'll click Next. And here's where we have to start thinking about our project structure. For now, we can think of our project name as the program we're writing, but I don't really want a project name like Module 3 Lab Part A. In programming, we try to use names that describe what something does. So if you're writing a program that calculates the area of a circle, you might name your project Circle Area Calculator. That's a little long, but it is descriptive. For this first project, I'm going to name it First Program. The location where you save it doesn't have any impact on me when I grade it. You're going to zip up the files and submit them, and I'll show you how to do that in another video, so it doesn't matter where they were when they were on your computer. Of course, you do need to be able to find them later. My suggestion is to make a folder in your Documents directory called CIS162AD or whatever other class you're in, and keep all your work in there. Wherever you put it, make sure you back it up occasionally, and please don't save all your work on a USB drive. I always feel terrible when students lose them, but me feeling bad doesn't help the 0 that you're going to get. Now, the solution name defaults to the same name as your project. Remember that this is a collection of related projects, and this is where we can identify the assignment we're working on. Module 4 Labs or whatever. This is probably Module 1 Labs for you, so that's what I'll use, but name it for whatever assignment you're working on. And then we'll go on to the next screen. The last page will usually be the same for all the projects. We won't have a lot of stuff to do here. You'll want to use the latest version of .NET that has either standard or long-term support. If this video is old, that won't match my version here, but that's okay. I'm going to talk about top-level statements in a few minutes, but we'll leave this unchecked since that makes it easier to start writing code. We can ignore the rest of the checkboxes, and let's go ahead and click through to create the solution and project. Visual Studio will grind away on that for a moment and create the project for you. Most of our window here is taken up by the code editor, but the Solution Explorer over here on the right is really important since that's where we can see all of our files and projects. You can also see the properties of the project down here at the bottom, and we'll look at that some other time. Visual Studio has a really flexible user interface. I can grab panels and rearrange them or close them completely. It's nice, but here's a really important tip. If you mess up your layout, just go to the Window menu and select Reset Window Layout. That'll put everything back to the default layout. In our Solution Explorer, we have a visual representation of that structure we were talking about earlier. The top is our solution, and under that is our project, and finally, our file. There's some other stuff here, but that's all we need to worry about. The default file name is program.cs, and that CS stands for C#. You can change the file name if you want by right-clicking and selecting that option, but make sure you keep the .cs at the end. By tradition, the first program we write in a new language is code that outputs Hello World, so the template actually starts there. I'm going to go ahead and delete that so we can start from scratch. To produce output, I'm going to use something called the write method. The statement to use that begins with the word console, followed by a period, and then the word write. The first lesson in programming is that details matter. Everything has to be spelled correctly, and everything is case sensitive. So, console has to be spelled with a capital C, and write has to be spelled with a capital W. Visual Studio uses color coding to show that it recognizes what we're typing, and if it doesn't recognize something, it'll underline it in red. In order for write to output something, it has to know what we want it to output. To give it that information, we put parentheses on the end. In the parentheses, we can put quotation marks and then type the message we want to display. So, hello C# in quotes. Again, details matter. The message has to have quotes on both sides, and the parentheses have to be there. In C#, a statement ends with a semicolon, a lot like a period at the end of a sentence. If I'm missing that, I'll have a little red underline. I can try and run the program by clicking the green Start button up here, but because of that error, it can't run. This pop-up we get when we can't run our program is really important, and that's especially true because we're all kind of conditioned to just close those things without paying much attention. It's saying that my code can't run, and it's asking if I want to run an old version of the code. In this case, I don't really have any old code because I just created the program, but even if I did, selecting yes is a really bad idea. If I hit yes, it's not running what I've got on the screen, it's running something I did before, and that's really confusing. The worst thing a student can do is check that little box and then click yes, because now it's just going to run that old code without even letting us know, and it'll be pretty much impossible to figure out what's going on. The best bet is probably to check the box and hit no. I'll leave it unchecked since I use this computer to record videos like this one, and I want that pop-up. So I'm missing a semicolon at the end of that line of code. When I fix that, the red underline goes away and I can try running again. Clicking that button is actually telling Visual Studio to compile my code and send it to the runtime to execute. Our program runs in a console window, and I can see my output right here at the top. After it executes my code, it pauses until I hit a key, so I have time to read through what happened. Incidentally, that's why this is called a console application. It runs in an old-school text console instead of a pretty graphical interface, which is a lot more complicated. This really isn't an impressive program, but if you're new to coding, this is kind of a big deal. You've just created your first computer program. Okay, let's try a couple more things with this code. I can add another line with a different message, so I'll put console.write welcome to CIS 162 AD. I'll run the program again, and now I see both messages in the output window. But notice that the messages are jammed together on the same line. The write method doesn't hit enter at the end of the line. The cursor just sits there and waits until we output some more. Since we often want to output a message and then move on to the next line, there's another method called writeLine. It works the same way, so I'll just change that write to writeLine and run it again. Another thing we need to know right away is how to use code comments. Comments are notes that we put in our source code. They get ignored by the compiler so we can put whatever we want in them and it won't affect the program. To write a comment on one line, just put 2 slashes. Visual Studio shades it green to show that it's a comment, and the rest of this line just gets skipped by the compiler. If I put a comment at the end of a line of code, the compiler will look at everything up until the slashes and then ignore everything after it. So we do that often to kind of explain what that line of code does. If you want to write a comment that uses more than one line, you indicate that with a slash and an asterisk or star, and then you end it with an asterisk and a slash. We always put a multi-line comment, or what I call a comment block, at the top of our program to provide some information about what it is and what it does. When you're coding for an assignment, I have a very specific format for that, and you should check the directions to see what it is. But even outside of class, the best practice is to describe the program a little. Now, I'm just going to run this again and make sure I haven't messed up anything. Okay, so our first program is done. But many assignments require 2 separate programs, so we need to know how to correctly add a project to this solution. And there's one thing I need to come back to. Remember that checkbox that asked about using top-level statements? A program in C# is actually a little more complicated than the first example we've tried. A program has to have a class, and a class has to have a method called main. That's where the program starts running. In order to make it easier, we can use top-level statements like what we've done here, and the compiler just creates all that other stuff for us. That idea is called top-level statements, and it's actually a pretty new feature in C#. So a lot of the example code that you see out there does it the old way. We'll want to try that to make sure you understand how it works. To try it out, we're going to make a new program, and that means a new project. Now, this is going to be closely related to the one we've already made. It's part of the same assignment for my class. So I should add the new project to my existing solution. And again, there are going to be a couple ways to do this. I can go to the File menu and select New and Project, or I can just go to my Solution Explorer and right-click on the solution, which is the one at the top, and from that menu I can select Add and then New Project. Notice that if I select the project instead, I don't actually get the option to add another project. Either way, you'll get the project creation screen again. And again, every program we make for the time being is going to be a console application. So I'll select that one and make sure I pick the one that will run on Windows or Mac or Linux. This is going to be a program that outputs some song lyrics, so I'll name the project Song Lyrics. If you added the new project by right-clicking on the solution in the Solution Explorer, it will know that we're trying to put it in that solution. But if you go through the menu at the top, you'll have a drop-down on this screen to select where to put it. We don't want to create a new solution, so I'm going to select Add to Solution. Here's where we have that checkbox for the option to not use top-level statements, so I could just check that box, but I'm going to show you how you can convert between the two styles after you've created the project. After it's created this Hello World template, notice that there's this little screwdriver icon up on line 1. I can click that, and there's an option to convert to a program.main style of program. Go ahead and select that. This is what a C# program actually looks like. With top-down statements, this is all hidden from us and generated when we compile. It looks a little confusing, but it's really no big deal. I just have to be careful about where I put my code. It doesn't go at the top of the file, it goes inside the main method, which is right here. Whenever we ask the runtime to execute one of our programs, it looks for this method called main. The curly braces denote the beginning and the end of that method, so anything I put between there is going to be what runs when we run our program. You can see that the template has already put this Hello World code right in that spot, so just like before, I can delete that line of code and I can begin writing my own. And since this is going to be a program that outputs some song lyrics, I'll go ahead and type that now. And then I'll execute my code to make sure it's working. But it's still running my code from the other program. Since this solution now has 2 projects, we have to specify which one we're running. Go to the Solution Explorer and right-click on the project you want to run. About halfway down the context menu is Set as Startup Project. The startup project, just like the name implies, is what runs when we start our program. It's probably tough to see on the video, but it makes the startup project name bold, and I can change that anytime I want. And by the way, when I click on something in the Solution Explorer, it shows that code in the editor. So I can just click back on program.cs to see my code. Now let's try running again. And it looks like everything is good here. You might also notice that we now have a tabbed interface in Visual Studio. I can have more than one program open at once in these tabs up here, and I can easily switch back and forth between the two. There's really no significant difference between the two ways of writing your program, and as far as I'm concerned, you can use either one. My expectation is that students are probably going to use top-level statements because it's a little less confusing. But later in the course, we're going to be organizing our own code into classes and methods, so we'll be seeing more of that older style down the road.